the next contribution from Ioanna Katapidi, that is a researcher and lecturer of the University of Birmingham. And so, Ioanna, you.
Thank you very much, Federica. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invite. It's also very nice to see some familiar faces and names here. So I'm glad to be with you today. I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me a second. Is it coming up?
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah. All right. Let me go to full screen mode. Yeah, here it is. So today, what I'm going to present is really a snapshot of some work that we undertook in China. So it's by no means a completed research. I am afraid that I will raise more questions than I will provide solutions to problems, but I found that it fits very well to the narrative of the seminar, of the conference today, because it is about industrial heritage. It is about various types of industrial heritage in a context that personally I was not familiar with. It involves some fascinating industrial spaces. And the question of how we manage these spaces, how we involve local communities, I think is very important. So what I'm going to do today is just to give a snapshot of some of these spaces. Actually, I will stay with your rationale, Federica. I will just reflect on 3 case studies, and then potentially I will just raise some issues, some areas that we can discuss later on. So just very briefly, an outline of the presentation. So I will start with the conceptual framework, just a little bit on the current state of the art. I will just proceed in contextual information about China, and especially industrial heritage in China, then industrial heritage and regeneration, some regeneration projects in the particular context. And then I will move down to my case studies, and we will close with some reflections and emerging questions. So very briefly, just reflecting on the current state of the art, we have seen that heritage in general, and especially urban heritage, is taking much space in the current discussions around heritage regeneration, the role of heritage as a tool or as a lever of economic development, economic and social development. We have seen its role and potential to the creative city or creative class or creative industry. So we have seen that the past 10 to 20 years are really active in terms of how industrial heritage is being treated worldwide. So there is a lot when it comes to research. Now, when it comes to industrial heritage, not heritage in general, but industrial heritage, I think it's very important to think beyond the rusty factories, beyond the dusty infrastructure, beyond the foundries, the mines, all these big spaces and buildings, because I think they include something that is very important, which is the societal history of industrial communities and how these have evolved, how these are still relevant, how they connect with these spaces. So I think that this social dimension is quite important when we talk about these spaces. As most of you are aware, there is a number of examples of industrial heritage reuse in Europe, in US, all over the world. However, when we talk about heritage regeneration, industrial focused heritage in China, we are talking about qualitatively different spaces, places, rationale. So I think the context is very, very different. In terms of the types of industrial heritage, we can see types that we are very familiar with, but at the same time, we have a great number of industrial heritage spaces linked to Cold War. So here we have another layer of complexity to deal with because it bears certain connotations. So understanding this local context and the specificities, I think, is very crucial for a meaningful reuse and regeneration. Very briefly, to give you a snapshot of the Chinese context and how industrial heritage is in Chinese cities, we have very generally 3 categories. We have industrial heritage related to 19th and 20th century. We have the Chinese socialist production practice spaces which have been produced during the 1947-1978 when we talk about the intensification of the industry. And then we are moving to industrial heritage of the impact of urban transformation in post-reform period. So we're talking about the period since the late 1970s and later on, where we are observing a state of dereliction in a number of these industrial sites. Some very general trends in terms of their reuse, and here I'm just very quickly have a snapshot of the three major cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and Chongqing, where my case studies are being located. So in general, we see in Beijing, because it's more dynamic, more arty, crafty, we have spontaneous reuse by artists that started in the 90s. Then we have the recognition by the state and local governments that they promote further this kind of reuse. We have public and private partnerships. We have this type of schemes. So from the 1990s onwards, Beijing is quite active in regenerating places that have to do with industrial heritage. The same happens in Shanghai. We see pretty much a similar approach. Maybe we have some more initiatives there due to the presence of the universities and the artist sector as well. But again, there is this top-down approach whereby the local government or the state is responsible for the reuse of such places. Now, when we go to the area, the wider area of Chongqing, which I will show you in a bit, is located just at the center of China, a little bit towards the west. We are still at the early stage of industrial reuse. It is less active in the promotion of cultural heritage sector. So we have seen much less happening here. So we were invited in this area. And this was a project initiated by the British Council in collaboration with Shanghai University. So we were invited in this area to view some of these places and provide some initial thoughts on the area and the potential of this area. Here I present a table which sums up some of the projects that have been undertaken in Beijing, in Shanghai, and Chongqing. The reason I'm having this table here is definitely not to go through each single case, but just to show that when we go to the area of Chongqing, just at the end, we have very, very limited active engagement with this kind of project. So it is something that is starting really now. It has started only very recently. When we talk about the different types of heritage in these different cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and Chongqing, we see state-led heavy industry project. We see projects related to light industry. We see urban infrastructure for multiple uses. But what is qualitatively different in Chongqing is the military industry, and is a type of industrial heritage that is quite challenging when we talk about reuse. And I will show you in a bit why this is the case. So just to locate you where we are, we're, as I said, just at the center towards the west of Shanghai. Chongqing area, the municipality, the wider municipality is the size of Austria. The city itself is adjacent to rural countries, which again makes it different to Shanghai and Beijing and other cities. It has been a wartime capital during the Second Sino-Japanese War, and it has been a major manufacturing and transportation center. This is just for the context. Now, the areas that we focused on were three different types of industrial sites. One had to do with the military industry, one with manufacturing industry, and then a completely different one that has to do with a worker village. It was a village purposely built for workers that used to work in a manufacturing industry in this area, and it has been completely or almost remoted now. So the first project, which is a really fascinating site, it is called the 816 site. This is supposed to be a nuclear military plant. Actually, this is a giant, it's a huge infrastructure, it's 9 floors under the earth. It's the biggest man-made cave in the world. It's a complex construction which was set up for an atomic reactor and storage of atomic energy and nuclear fuel. It occupies the space of up to 151 million cubic meters. It is about 80 meters high, so you can understand the volume of it. It contains, now we're talking about all the space under the earth, it contains more than 130 roads, tunnels, and the total length is 24 kilometers in the cave. So for this project, I think 20,000 officers were employed, to dig, and this is all manual work. And it was designed so that it can resist the magnitude of a big earthquake. And for all this time, it was not, you could not identify it in the map. They have even tweaked the details on the map so that this area is not obvious in the maps. And it was only after it became redundant, it was only in 2010 that they started thinking about the regeneration of this space and what they can do. And it's only recently that they decided to open part of it to the tourists and to promote it as a tourist attraction. So now I'll just show you some of the pictures from the past of how they did all this manual work, which is very impressive. Today, part of it, you can see on the right-hand side, just the opening to the tunnel and the train on the left-hand side that takes you just at the doorstep. And then you can go further down. It features some of the bombs, some of the this nuclear sort of heritage. They try to incorporate some modern technology, but yet the food floor, the visitation is very limited. At the time that we were there, we didn't see many people coming in, so it's very, very much underused, and they are seeking ways of mobilizing it further and opening it further. Yet there is some work to be done regarding the promotion, regarding the reuse of other spaces, because obviously we're talking about a huge space. Now, the next example comes from an area very close by. It is a manufacturing industry. It is a big factory, again, that it contains many facilities. The workers used to live there, so there are residences, some complementary spaces, even spaces for amusement, such as a small theater here. This has been redundant. It used to produce engines, different types of engines, and they are seeking to employ an approach by which they open part of it as a museum, and then some other spaces they are seeking to co-develop with the community, but yet the community engagement is very limited. It's a very much top-down approach, so it's only this part that you can see here that it's open for visitation. The advantage here is that it's in a very, very close proximity to some rural areas. So you have all this green space, which is not very far from the city. So it attracts people just for its natural environment. So the question here is how we can combine these two spaces. And I am just moving to the next case study, which was for me very interesting. It is a workers' village. It is called Shabatown. It is located next, very close to that factory that I have here on the screen. This used to be an active industry. Now there are not only few spaces that they are still active here, but very, very limited activity. I am just going to show you some of the buildings in the area. All of them have been abandoned. Just very few places are being occupied by residents at the moment. And we're talking about huge infrastructure that is lost somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And with a few people still staying around that face economic problems, that face other issues that have to be resolved if we're talking about a holistic and sustainable approach to their development. Yet you can see this marriage between the nature and the infrastructure. So again, it is a matter of how we capitalize on this combination. These are some of the buildings that used to be in the area, now completely derelict. There was a theater, there was a big cinema, there was a school. So we're talking about a full functioning, autonomous sort of community, whereby very, very little staff is there. You can see the state of dereliction at the moment. This is just the top front. It was the entrance to the cinema, and the bottom right, it was the entrance to the theater and some communal spaces, which is very, very much underused at the moment. And this is a space for discussion in terms of how it can be used to facilitate certain activities, to attract people, and to essentially regenerate the entire area. So this is the general overview of the area, again, at the very, very bad state of dereliction. And this just few of the people from the local community that, again, are still wondering what is going to be happening here. The level of engagement is very low. The approach that is being taken is very top down. So there are people deciding about their future without them being consulted in a way, but with the potential, with the willingness to open up and potentially create a more cooperative approach, if you like. So this is at the very, very early stage. It's at the stage of conceptualization at the moment. And I would just like to highlight some of the key areas, some of the themes that we have identified. And even though we see that these three projects are, in terms of their nature, they're very different, still there are some overlapping issues that we need to take into consideration when we talk about their regeneration. So we see that we have very large spaces. They bear certain socio-political connotations. We're talking about sites building during the Cold War, representing a certain political regime, that they have been evacuated because of certain political reasons. So it's a matter of how we bring this into life by creating other connotations that are capable of bringing people along and creating something that is more sustainable. The state of dereliction and despair, as you can tell, is very high, and it's been there for a long time. So the costs involved are very high. The socioeconomic issues, I think, are the big issues to address, because we're talking about unemployment in the area, we're talking about poor living conditions, especially for some people of the local communities. So when we are considering the type of regeneration, or the type of reuse, it is a matter of not only polishing the buildings, but also work with communities to provide better socioeconomic conditions, and work with them and co-create these conditions. We are talking about connectivity as well, because some of these areas are kind of remoted, accessible only by private means. So if the vision is to bring people, bring tourists, or create a certain type of tourist industry, how we connect this to the rest of the world. The communities, as well, as I mentioned before, have been very disadvantaged in some of these areas. So how we bring these communities into the discussion, and what are the other needs that we need to cover before we talk about any type of regeneration or reuse that is open to just tourism. And of course, the big question of the approach that we follow, whether it's going to be top down or bottom up to valorize such places. So some questions from these specific case studies is the extent to which these sites have the potential to serve as a lever for heritage-led regeneration. Apart from renovating these areas, I think the vision is to bring life, to rejuvenate the economy here. So to what extent these areas can function in that way, they can provide this tool. Obviously, from what we can see, they provide the potential to function as incubators of culture and creative economy, but this requires thinking, this requires discussion with different stakeholders, and also because we are talking about very big spaces with many different elements around, how we move from a building-based approach to a more holistic conservation of the overall environment and the landscape. So how we provide a more holistic approach to the entire site. We've seen this combination between nature and the industrial infrastructure. So how we can capitalize on the links between this natural and cultural sort of environment. And how this is different to pure urban heritage sites, because I think there is an opportunity here. Also, because we're talking about, in some of these places, we're talking about industries and histories that are pretty much still alive. I mean, there are people from the communities that they have memories of these places when they were built, when they were active. So how we bring the oral histories and memories into this planning and into heritage-led regeneration. Due to the negative or challenging connotation of these places to war, to Cold War, to political heavy histories, how we rebrand their identities and how we transform their identities into something that is more positive and more welcoming, depending on the vision that people have for this area, but also how we go beyond tourism to mobilize and engage the local population and provide the necessary facilities and cover needs that are really, really important to people who live and engage with these sites on a daily basis. So understanding these dynamics and also bringing the local communities and the different stakeholders to foster participation, I think is very critical for this kind of places. So when we talk about participation here, very quickly, we need to question what we mean by participation. So there are different levels of participation. I just point at three that we most commonly find in tourist development: coercive participation, which is the lowest level of participation. This is where you just have simple information distributed for the local communities, but local communities cannot play any part in the decision making. Then we have the average sort of participation, the so-called induced participation, whereby the local communities can make some decisions. Sorry, Federica?
1 minute left.
1 minute. Yeah. I'll just be very quick. And the spontaneous participation, where all the power and decision making is in the hands of local communities. So which level of participation we go for, again, it depends on the political context, it depends on the social dimensions, but also it depends on a number of factors that have to do with motivation, opportunity, and ability. So motivation has to do with the willingness of the different stakeholders and their interest to become involved in the development process. But we also need the opportunity. So we're talking about the preconditions, such as the political will, the rules and the channels to make this participation possible. And then the ability that has to do, it's contingent upon various factors such as knowledge, skills, cultural background, etc. So just to finish off, again, I promise that I will bring more questions than answers. So who is responsible for making decisions on heritage listing and their use of this heritage? What is the political climate and the future orientation for these places? How we can foster better interaction between authorities and local communities, how we go about heritage that is ignored by authorities, such as the memories, such as the oral histories, and what is the role of the capacity of communities in fostering this sort of heritage, and also the opposite. What do we do about heritage that has been ignored by communities, but is important for local authorities? How we bring this discussion and how we bring these different stakeholders together. And overall, I think that it is a matter of fostering the discussion and opening up the debate in ways that can be facilitating for these different stakeholders, which is obviously a challenge, not only in the particular context, but I believe in many international projects around the world. So thank you very much. Sorry if I took more time.
Many thanks, Ioanna. No, it was really nice presentation, very nice project.